Warhammer 40k Gladius, Relics of War, is a turn-based strategy game set in the 40k universe. Let's check it out. I first got into the Warhammer and Warhammer 40k tabletop games back in the 1990s, before Games Workshop started doubling their prices on the figs every year, but that's a whole other problem. And since then, I've played a pretty good number of console and PC games based on both of them over the years. For 40k, mostly these have been a mix of like first-person shooters like Fire Warrior and real-time strategy games like the Dawn of War series. Well, Gladius is different. This is a turn-based strategy game that kind of feels like a cross between StarCraft and Civilization VI, with some elements of the earlier 40k Dawn of War games added in. This isn't a bad thing, as it takes a lot of good elements from each of those and mixes in some new stuff of its own. Overall, the result is pretty good. The basic premise is the same as several of the other 40k based games out there. Some planet out in the middle of nowhere, the sleeping Necrons and Eldar webway gates, and then whoops! Orcs, Tyranids, the Imperium, and the Tau, and maybe someone else try to colonize it. They crash land or otherwise find themselves stuck on the surface with nowhere to go. Oh, and chaos shows up to ruin everyone's day because, of course, it does. Just about every 40k faction is represented, except for the Dark Eldar, or some of the less common Imperial factions like the Grey Knights and the Sisters of Battle. The actual gameplay revolves around familiar turn-based strategy concepts like managing cities, building units, exploring, capturing and holding map objectives, progressing through a technology tree, managing income of strategic resources, and that kind of stuff. Let's start off with what I like. The factions in the game are quite diverse, and each one has completely different mechanics for resource management, unit recruiting, and so on. For example, the Space Marines can only found one city, but they can unlock drop pods later in the game and land new units anywhere on the map. The Necron units can all heal themselves. Many of the Tau units can summon gun drones on a cooldown, and they can convert wild units of Vespid or Kroot Hounds over to their side. Each faction has a unique feel to it, and it seems like, they matched the 40k lore pretty well with how they did the rules and the mechanics. Every faction also gets a set of optional quest missions inside the match that they can perform during the game for some bonuses. For example, research some specific technology and recruit two of some new unit. And you do that, and you get a huge one-time boost of some specific resource. They get progressively more challenging as the game goes on, but they're entirely optional, and sometimes I just ignore them. To win the match, you literally just wipe out everyone else. This isn't so much of a map painter as it is a map eraser. Your overall goal is just to be the last faction standing, not including like the neutral wildlife and random factionless units that wander the map. More on those later. Similarly, you'll lose if all of your cities are destroyed. Pretty simplistic win conditions. So, a few generally critical observations and things I don't like about the game. First, there's no campaign mode or, story mode of any kind. The game is entirely just deathmatch on a random map. That's it. There's no campaign linking multiple missions together, not even a unique single mission for each faction with a custom-tailored challenge to close out some story objectives. The game seems like it was very specifically designed with online multiplayer deathmatch in mind, and in single player, it's the exact same game mode, but just limited to AI opponents. That's not a huge problem or anything. but I'll admit that I was a little let down when I realized it, given how amazing the game engine is and what they could do with it if they wanted to in terms of setting up some sort of a mission-to-mission single-player campaign. Now, when you're in a match, one of the speed bumps to expansion is that there are all these neutral units wandering around the map, most of which are hostile, but a few of them will only attack if you loiter around them for a couple of turns. That's fine, and from a gameplay mechanics standpoint, the way that they implemented it makes sense as a gatekeeping element to stop some of the faster factions from just building 5 cities before the mid-game even starts. The problem is, those neutral units are frickin' everywhere. Even if you set the wildlife to the lowest setting in the random map customization options, you get all these giant death robots, these flying bees that spawn more bees when they kill things, random patrols of hostile chaos cultists, and these incredibly annoying floating mind control enslaver monsters that permanently charm your units until the enslaver is killed. The density of these neutral mobs forces you into a very fast-paced playstyle where you're constantly in combat somewhere, fighting something non-stop, without any real opportunity to regroup or build up for a big push. Even if you just stay near your original city, the neutral mobs will eventually come over to say hi, forcing you into endless combat. I'm sure that that type of fast-paced, hectic gameplay appeals to a lot of players, but to me it can sometimes get pretty annoying. It seems like frequently, when I identify some spot that I want to expand a new city to, some map objective I want to capture, or like a decent route to attack another faction city, I can't, because there's a big pack of those replicating bees that just showed up, and it killed one of my units that was healing, and now the bees are spawning more of themselves and just snowballing out of control, so I have to drop everything to go deal with them. 2 or 3 turns before I'm done dealing with the bees, the death robots show up and just keep me fighting on, so I'll never get time to build up or go do that original thing I was trying for. To be clear, that sort of nonsense doesn't always happen, but it happens frequently enough that I'm mentioning it here, and in my opinion, it really detracts from the experience. And it doesn't let up on the lower difficulty levels either. I tried bringing the difficulty all the way down, and the map is still covered in those neutral mobs. Now, to make matters worse, every now and then, a huge Chaos Titan type of thing, called the Lord of Skulls, randomly spawns in for a few turns. You can sometimes just ignore the Lord of Skulls, but if it spawns in some location you can't go around or that threatens your cities, it can be a really serious problem because it can basically one-shot anything except for some really tough late-game units. This brings us to DLC. This is one of those games where the base game only comes with a small set of factions and units, and you have to pay for DLC in order to get access to everything else. If you play online, everyone will need to be at the same level, so you're basically forced to pony up huge money for a few years' worth of DLC add-ons that never seem to go down in price as the game gets older. Gladius isn't the first game to suffer from this, and it won't be the last, but it absolutely does suffer from it. So, if you want the full experience, open up the wallet. Those might seem like some pretty heavy-handed gripes, but I really do enjoy Gladius quite a bit. The multiplayer matches are fun, the random map generation keeps every match pretty fresh, and even in single player, you can tweak the settings enough to get either a reasonably fast match that you can smash through in about 90 minutes, or you can load up a huge map with tons of opponents and run the same match for 6 hours or longer. Another element that I think they did a really great job with is the tech tree progression. Instead of a linear tree, where each unlocked tech or upgrade has specific techs that lead to it, like in Civilization, you just have to unlock a set number of techs from one particular level before unlocking the next level. And you can mix and match any that you want within the tech levels. That's actually a really cool way to handle tech progression in this kind of a game, and it lets you completely customize your faction's progression to fit in with your personal playstyle, or the opposition you're facing. Also, some of the techs unlock new units or buildings, but others provide passive bonuses or new unit abilities, like upgraded armor or grenades for infantry units, and that sort of thing makes the progression a bit more dynamic. They did a good job with that. So, is it fun? Yes, it is. There's enough variety between the factions, and even within the factions, considering how the tech progression works, to keep things at least marginally different each time you play. But I think there's a finite limit somewhere to the replayability factor, the same as there is for like StarCraft or similar games, and I think you'll find that limit a little faster, since there isn't any kind of single-player campaign to play through or anything, so it's kinda half the game that it could be. But who knows? Given the quantity of expensive DLC bundles, it's entirely possible that they'll drop a story mode DLC pack that adds in a progression campaign for each faction or something. Anyway, if you are at all into turn-based strategy and you dig the 40k universe, definitely check this one out. It's worth a look. As always, thanks for watching.